Welcome back to the P S Gilmore Story and episode 32 of the World Peace Jubilee, part 8 of the actual Peace Jubilee story. You're probably saying at this stage, when is he going to finish this particular chapter on the Peace Jubilee? And you're right, because it is going on a long time. But you must realize how big this story is. And I'm barely but skimming through it quickly and not really covering the story in depth. However, one has to remember that there were 21 complete concerts, and some days they were packed with crowds. Other days there was more people in the choirs and orchestra than in the actual auditorium. And this has never been told before on YouTube or anywhere for that matter. And I'm trying to give you some idea of the immensity of the occasion. So click like and subscribe and ask me whatever questions you wish. I'd love to hear from you. One of the ignored stories of the World Peace Jubilee is that of the African American participation in the event and their importance then and historically. Why has this been almost ignored, and how is the story sidestepped in history when it is quite important, as you'll see? The story of these African American singers started for Gilmore about 10 years previously in North Carolina, and specifically on the streets of New Bern, where Gilmore really could not ignore the reaction of the freed slave to the music his band was playing for their benefit. He understood their appreciation of rhythm and tone, and knew in his case he had so much more to learn. So when the Jubilee in 1872 offered the chance to feature the African American voice and talent to a completely white audience, he wasn't going to forego the opportunity. And one group, especially from Nashville, Tennessee, called the Jubilee Singers, were on a mission at this time to raise money to rebuild their college in Tennessee and re-equip it for new teachers, especially to educate the freed slaves after emancipation. By offering concerts to various audiences, they would raise the funds necessary to reach their target, and in spite of racism, opposition, and abuse, they sang and they toiled towards or against adversity as they journeyed towards Chicago initially and aimed to reach an even bigger audience that would be attending the World Peace Jubilee in Boston. Almost 2 months before the Great Jubilee opened in the hub, or Boston, an opportunity arose, having the previous night just given a wonderful concert in Boston Tremont Temple Theatre and created a sensation amongst the crowd. They were invited to the New England Conservatory of Music, which now was the World Peace Jubilee headquarters, at 10 a.m. that morning. And for that first hour, according to the reports, they made the walls echo with their music. Mr. Gilmore expressed his complete satisfaction with their performance, and also his hope that that arrangements could be made to have them present at the upcoming festival. While the Jubilee Singers were in the office, it was crowded with those who were attracted by their songs. The date of that report, by the way, was April the 18th in the Peace Jubilee reports of the Boston Daily Globe. Gilmore seemed to have a plan, And he wasn't going to be quiet on the subject of equality, at least in music. He recruited more performers, even more famous at the time, called the Higher Sisters, Hyer Sisters. Emma Louise, who was a contralto, and Anna, who was a soprano. Two wonderful singers who were known at this time in the northern states and managed by their father, Samuel, who was a tenor. In addition, the massive 22,000 member World Peace Jubilee choir had 150 member chorus of coloured singers. And so, apart from the sparse newspaper reports of the two separate appearances in the Jubilee of these coloured singers, actually on June the 22nd, 23rd, and 25th in the Colosseum, the most important recording of the Jubilee singers and their performances themselves was actually in their own biography of their trials, tribulations, and victories against all odds, written by J.B.T. Marsh in their autobiography called The Story of the Jubilee Singers, published 1899. In that book, in fact, in chapter 6, it describes the events of June the 22nd or 23rd. It's not specific, in the Colosseum. And I quote, "The singers had received an invitation to participate in the second World Peace Jubilee in Boston in June. The immense audience of 40,000 people was gathered from all parts of the land, and the colour prejudice that followed the Jubilee singers everywhere reappeared here in a shower of brutal hisses that greeted their first appearance. But the air of radical New England, of the New England city, is not kindly to colourphobia, and a deluge of applause answered and drowned the insult. And a day or two afterwards, the singers had a proud revenge." It's important to realize that the podium on which Gilmore conducted from was stepped up as much as 10 feet high. So all the musicians could actually see his directions amongst the thousands of people in the auditorium. And so when the Jubilee singers were greeted, as they said, with brutal hisses and abuse, according to one report, he asked them to actually join him on his level of the podium, and suggested in clear terms that if anyone didn't feel comfortable with the melodious voices of the Jubilee singers, that they should leave immediately. I emphasize that I am still investigating these comments. 2 days later, however, on the 25th of June, President Grant arrived with his complete cabinet, to the delight of all within the Colosseum, including the 40,000 seated inside, plus an additional reported 20,000 standing inside, plus another 50,000 outside, seated on the dusty surrounds of the Colosseum itself, but listening through the pine walls. This day was of immense importance internationally as a political spectacle as well as a musical occasion. And in the latter regard, the concert would feature in the order of their performance the following organizations: the U.S. Marine Band, followed by the Band of the Grenadier Guards of England, followed by Herr Strauss's Orchestra of Vienna, followed by the Band of the Kaiser Franz Grenadier Regiment of Prussia, followed by the Band of La Garde Républicaine de France, followed by the Colored Singers of the Higher Sisters and the Jubilee Singers of Nashville, Tennessee. And so once more, I return to the J.B.T. Marsh book and page 41 of chapter 6 and read from the volume their description of the events of that day. Mrs. Julia Ward Howe's stirring lyric, The Battle Hymn of the Republic, was on the programme, to be sung to the ear of John Brown. The first verse was to be taken by some coloured singers of Boston, but for some unexplained reason, the key was given to the orchestra in E flat, cruelly high under these circumstances, and the first verses were a painful failure. The Jubilee Singers were to come in with the verse beginning, He hath sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. Fired by the remembrance of the reception on the previous day and the feeling that to some extent the reputation of their colour was at stake, they sang as if inspired. Mr. White's masterly drill had made easy to them the high notes on which the others had failed. Every word of the first line rang through the great Colosseum as if sounded out of a trumpet. The great audience was carried away on a whirlwind of delight. The trained musicians in the orchestra bent forward in forgetfulness of their parts, and one old German was conspicuous, holding his violoncello above his head with one hand and whacking out upon it his applause with the bow held in the other. When the grand old chorus, Glory, Glory, Alleluia, followed with the swelling of a volume of music from the great orchestra, the thunder of the bands and the roar of the artillery, the scene was indescribable. 20,000 people were on their feet. Ladies waved their handkerchiefs. Men threw their hats in the air, and the Colosseum rang with the cheers and shouts of the Jubilees forever. Mr. Gilmore brought the singers from their place below and amassed them upon his own platform, where they sang the remaining verses. Mr. White has never quite forgiven himself that he did not answer the thunderous encore that followed with John Brown in the original version. Musically speaking, it was the greatest triumph of their career, and they never recall it without a gleaming eye and quickened pulse. It was worth more than a congressional enactment in bringing that audience to the true ground on the question of civil rights. For the record, the Jubilee Singers for that performance were Ella Shepherd, Maggie L. Porter, Jenny Jackson, Mabel Lewis, Minnie Tate, Georgia Gordon, Julia Jackson, Thomas Rutling, Edmund Watkins, Benjamin M. Holmes, and Isaac P. Dickerson. So, please remember those words by former slaves who lived through slavery and its horrors, experienced its awfulness, and never forgot its memories, that this event was, quoting, worth more than a congressional enactment in bringing that audience to the true ground on the question of civil rights. End of quote. And dare I say it, this event could not have happened without P S Gilmore's imagination, his leadership, and his inspiration. Racism in music would continue, as we know, through Louis Armstrong's story, or Scott Joplin's story, or Tamla Motown much later still, and their combined experiences. But at least now, people were starting to listen to the beauty of the voice of the African American, and they still listen today to the Jubilee Singers, 150 years later on. So, folks, thank you very much for your attention. Next week, we'll have more of the P S Gilmore Story and its memorabilia. Please click like and subscribe and comment as you will. And thank you all. Regards from Ireland. Bye now.